The duel was supposed to be symbolic. A ceremony meant to showcase unity between the mighty Saranthari Empire and the rising human federation. But for Princess Valyra, heiress to 1,000 generations of warbinders, today wasn't about peace. It was about humiliating a human. She stepped into the arena, clad in shimmering silver armor, her spear glowing like a lightning bolt. Her eyes locked on her opponent. A human soldier, wearing outdated gear, looking like he'd just woken up in a supply closet. Elias Ward. No poise. No reputation. Just a crooked smile, and a name tag that read, "Property of Dad's old gym bag." She scoffed. This is their warrior? But then the gong echoed. And Valyra launched forward like a storm. He stumbled. Tripped. Flinched. But somehow, evaded every strike. Not through skill, but through pure, unpredictable chaos. When she attacked, he parried with awkward jokes. When she pressed in, he talked about sandwiches. She had never fought anyone who survived by being hilarious. And somewhere between the dodging, the laughter, and the absurdity, she began to wonder if she wanted to win at all. Maybe for the first time in her life. She just wanted to understand this human. The arena was vast, stretching under a shimmering sky dome that flickered with simulated stars. Twin moons hung in the air, casting an ethereal glow over the ground below. It was a ceremonial space, designed for the finest of duels where worlds collided, yet remained far apart. Princess Valyra stepped into the arena with a presence that commanded attention. Her iridescent silk steel armor gleamed under the artificial lights, light as a whisper yet powerful enough to deflect plasma fire. The long, pointed ears of her noble bloodline twitched beneath her helmet, giving her an air of anticipation, as though she were about to play a joke on the universe. Her violet eyes narrowed as they fixed on her opponent. The human soldier, Elias Ward, entered the ring. His armor was gray and bulky, a far cry from the elegance of Valyra's ceremonial regalia. It was unremarkable, much like the soldier himself. He wore a patch on his chest that read "Property of Dad's old gym bag," a curious detail in such a solemn place. His awkwardness was evident as he looked around, uncertain of what was expected. He raised a hand to the crowd, but no one waved back. They didn't know whether he was here to duel or deliver pizza. Valyra watched him with bemusement. The duel had been intended to showcase strength, tradition, and political solidarity. Yet here stood a human, out of place and seemingly unprepared for the grandeur of it all. She activated her communication field, her voice dripping with a hint of mockery. "Princess Valyra, are we absolutely certain this is the right combatant?" "Royal Adjutant, yes, Highness. He's the one." Princess Valyra sighs dramatically. "Well, this will be interesting." The ceremonial gong sounded, a deep, resonant vibration that swept through the arena like the growl of a slumbering beast. The match had begun. Valyra moved first. With years of training ingrained in her body, she spun her spear in the air with practiced elegance. Her movements were fluid and precise, each step designed to mesmerize, to disorient. She was quick, too quick for a human opponent, or so she thought. Elias, seemingly unaware of the gravity of the situation, stumbled backward. His foot caught on his own heel, and he collapsed into a crouch, barely avoiding Valyra's spear. The crowd gasped, unsure whether to applaud or laugh. Elias blinked up, his helmet slightly askew. Elias Ward, grinning sheepishly, "Did I dodge that? I think I dodged that. I'm going to call that a win." Valyra almost laughed. She couldn't help herself. This human was different. He was clumsy, yes, but there was something about the way he kept standing up after every fall that made her curious. "Princess Valyra," mockingly, "you're not even trying to fight, human. Do you even know which end of that thing to use?" Elias Ward, shrugging, still catching his breath, still figuring it out. "I'm pretty sure the shiny end is the important part." Valyra tilted her head, slightly surprised by his response. He wasn't intimidated, nor was he taking the duel seriously. It was a game to him. She spun her spear again, aiming for another strike. This time, Elias sidestepped, though his movement was less graceful, more accidental. But there was something about his unpredictability that started to irritate her. Every time she thought she had him, he slipped away, like water running through her fingers. Princess Valyra, pausing mid-strike, "Why aren't you attacking?" Elias Ward, grinning, "Thought I'd wait until you got tired. You know, wear you down with charm and confusion." Valyra's frustration grew, but it was mixed with something else. Her respect for him? No, that couldn't be it. He was making a mockery of the sacred duel, but there was something about the way he was dodging, unpredictably and almost without rhythm, that caught her attention. The duel continued, but the air in the arena had changed. What began as a formal ceremony now felt more like an unpredictable dance. The audience, once filled with noble faces and eager anticipation, had fallen into an uneasy silence. They were unsure if they were watching a mockery or a moment of unprecedented diplomacy unfolding before their eyes. Princess Valyra moved with precision, her spear slicing through the air, glowing with Chinook energy. Each strike was designed to intimidate, to break her opponent's resolve. Yet Elias, the human soldier, kept surprising her. He was awkward, unpredictable, but somehow he kept avoiding her attacks. Elias Ward, dodging another strike, "You're really good at this, it's like I'm fighting a blur." Valyra's expression tightened. He was mocking her now, but she could feel the tension building in her chest. She had expected to end this quickly, but something about this human soldier, his chaos, his unpredictability, made her hesitate. Her spear was poised for another strike, but this time, she faltered. "Princess Valyra," with a subtle snarl, "why do you keep avoiding me?" Elias Ward, grinning, out of breath, "I'm just waiting for you to wear yourself out, princess. No rush." Valyra's violet eyes flashed with something sharp, but the irritation was mixed with an odd sense of curiosity. This wasn't what she had expected. She was trained to defeat warriors who followed the rules, who adhered to tradition, who knew the rhythm of combat. But Elias? He didn't fight like that. He was fighting like a storm, unpredictable, wild, and chaotic. Princess Valyra, gritting her teeth, "You mock everything, human. This is a sacred duel." Elias Ward pauses, catching his breath, "I'm not mocking it. I'm just surviving. Isn't that what we're all doing?" Valyra didn't respond right away. She lunged again, her spear moving faster now, the tip aimed toward his chest. But just before it struck, Elias sidestepped, his movements clumsy but strangely effective. He stumbled again, this time rolling backward to avoid her spear, and came up on his feet with his baton raised in defense, though it looked more like a stick than a weapon. For the first time, Valyra was truly unsettled. She had expected this duel to be a display of strength, of cultural superiority, but instead, it was turning into something else entirely. "Princess Valyra," her voice softer, more thoughtful, "You're not fighting like I expected." Elias Ward, grinning despite himself, "I never do." Valyra spun around, her spear moving in a blur of graceful, precise strikes, each one aimed with deadly intent. But Elias, through sheer instinct, managed to avoid them, not with elegance, but with a mix of flailing desperation and surprising adaptability. His movements became less about dodging and more about understanding her rhythm. He was starting to anticipate her strikes. Princess Valyra, frustrated, but intrigued, "What are you doing?" Elias Ward, panting, "I'm learning. Picking up the patterns. You're good, but you're predictable. It's like a dance, right? You follow the steps, and I try to make sure I don't trip." Valyra paused mid-swing, her spear hovering in the air as her mind caught up with his words. He wasn't just avoiding her. He was adapting. He was beginning to read her moves, and he was doing it without any formal training, without any advanced combat tactics. Just instinct. And that made her uncomfortable. She took a step back, looking at him with narrowed eyes. His baton was still in his hand, but his posture had shifted. He wasn't just trying to survive anymore. He was engaging. And that was something she hadn't expected. As the seconds ticked by, the intensity of the fight grew, but so did something else. Something unspoken, a shift in the dynamics of the arena. What had begun as a farce was now turning into a confrontation, one not just of weapons, but of wills. For the first time, Valyra wasn't just facing an opponent, she was facing a puzzle she couldn't solve, a human who refused to follow the rules. The duel continued, but the energy in the arena had shifted. No longer was it a ceremonial performance, it was something deeper, something real. The crowd, once silent and confused, now murmured in hushed tones. They had come expecting a clash of cultures, an elegant display of martial prowess. What they were witnessing, however, was something entirely unexpected, a strange dance between two beings from different worlds, a battle not just of strength, but of character. Princess Valyra circled Elias with calculated precision. Her spear hummed through the air, cutting sharp arcs that left behind faint trails of light. She was fast, so fast that her movements blurred. But Elias, despite his lack of formal training, was starting to match her rhythm, or at least, he was avoiding the strikes with a newfound understanding. Elias Ward, dodging a strike by a hair's breadth, grinning, "You know, I think I'm starting to get the hang of this." Valyra's eyes narrowed as she watched him, now moving with surprising agility. He was still far from graceful, but he had stopped relying solely on luck. Instead, he was reading her moves, predicting them, even. Something about that frustrated her. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Princess Valyra, through clenched teeth, "You should have been defeated by now." Elias Ward, catching his breath, clearly exhausted but enjoying himself, "Well, I guess I'm just full of surprises." He ducked low as her spear sliced through the space where his head had been only a second before. It was a close call. Too close. Valyra's patience was starting to wear thin. She had been trained to defeat opponents who followed the rules. Elias, though untrained, had a gift for making his own. With a swift motion, she aimed for his legs. Her spear lashed out in a blur of glowing light. Elias saw it coming just in time. He sidestepped, but not perfectly. Her strike grazed the edge of his tactical armor, leaving a deep scratch. He stumbled but regained his balance with surprising speed. Elias Ward, grinning through the pain, holding his side, "Point for the princess, I suppose." Valyra didn't respond at first. She was staring at him, not just as an opponent but as something else entirely. For the first time, she was unsure of her next move. Every strike she delivered, every movement she made, he seemed to evade, not by chance, but by design. Elias was no longer simply dodging, he was adapting. And that, more than anything, was what unsettled her. "Princess Valyra," her voice softer, almost intrigued, "you've stopped fleeing." Elias Ward, pausing, wiping sweat from his forehead, his baton still held loosely in his hand, "Yeah, I figured it was time. I'm learning how to stay in the fight." Valyra took a step back, her eyes never leaving his. She had always been told that her strength lay in her training, her speed, her ability to read the battlefield. And yet, here was this human soldier, awkward, clumsy, but somehow more dangerous than she had anticipated. The fight had shifted from a performance to something more real. And she wasn't sure how to handle that. Princess Valyra, with a small smile, almost a recognition, "You think you've learned everything already?" Elias Ward, shrugging, still breathing heavily, "No, not everything. But enough to know that sometimes, you have to stop trying to outmaneuver the world and just live in it." His words caught her off guard. It wasn't the typical bravado she expected from an opponent. His simplicity, his directness, almost disarmed her more than any strike could. She had expected to break him, to see him cower or give up. But Elias? He wasn't intimidated. He wasn't trying to prove himself. He was simply present. And that was a weapon she hadn't accounted for. As the duel continued, the tension in the air thickened. They circled one another, neither willing to break the silence that had fallen between them. Valyra was aware now of the shifting power dynamic. Elias was no longer just a human soldier to be defeated, he was something more, an enigma, a challenge, and for the first time, she questioned her own motives. Princess Valyra, after a long silence, her voice quieter, almost contemplative, "You're not like any other human I've fought." Elias Ward, grinning, stepping toward her with a newfound confidence, "I'd like to think that's a compliment." The duel continued, but it was no longer about honor or tradition. It was about something far deeper, something unspoken. A shift had occurred between them, and neither of them was sure where it would lead. They had entered the arena as enemies, but in this strange, unpredictable battle, something was starting to grow. Something that neither Valyra nor Elias fully understood. The duel stretched on, but the tension had changed. What once felt like a clash of cultures, a ceremonial battle between the Saranthari Empire and the Human Federation, had evolved into something far more complex. Both Valyra and Elias had stopped thinking of this as just a fight. The movements of their bodies now spoke a language all their own, a dance of survival, of adaptation, and something deeper, something unspoken. Valyra's spear moved with elegance, each strike a reflection of her noble bloodline, her training, and the centuries of tradition behind her. But Elias? He had stopped dodging by instinct alone. His movements, though still unpolished, had become deliberate. He was learning to read her rhythm, to anticipate her next strike. It was no longer just chaos. There was intention behind every awkward step. Princess Valyra, narrowing her eyes, still circling him, "You're adapting. How long do you intend to keep this up, human?" Elias Ward, panting, but grinning, "Until you get bored, I guess. I've got nowhere to be." Valyra's eyes flickered with frustration, but there was something else there too, a spark of curiosity. She had always been the one to control the duel, to dictate its pace and outcome. Yet here she was, stuck in the rhythm of his unpredictable dance. He wasn't following the rules, and that was what intrigued her most. Princess Valyra, with a slight tilt of her head, voice quieter than before, "Why do you fight like this?" Elias Ward, shrugging, stepping lightly to the side to avoid her strike, "I don't know. It's the only way I know how to survive. I'm not here to win. I'm just here to keep moving, keep adapting." His words lingered in the air for a moment. Valyra, usually so composed, felt a crack in her own armor, her carefully built facade of control. He wasn't fighting to prove anything to her or to anyone else. He was simply existing. In a strange way, that made him harder to defeat than anyone she had ever faced. With a flick of her wrist, Valyra launched another series of strikes, but this time, Elias responded differently. His dodges were more fluid, his counters more precise. It was as if the fight was no longer about evading her strikes but becoming part of her movements, matching her step for step, though still with the awkwardness of a beginner. For the first time in a duel, Valyra hesitated. There was an opening, one she had always taken before, one she knew would end the fight. But she didn't strike. Instead, she studied him, really studied him. Elias, though still clumsy, was no longer the same human soldier who had stumbled into the arena. He was different. He had stopped simply surviving. Now, he was becoming a worthy opponent. Princess Valyra, lowering her spear slightly, her voice softer, "You could have ended this. Why haven't you?" Elias Ward, breathing heavily, eyes meeting hers, "Maybe I don't want to end it." "Not yet." They circled again, but this time there was no urgency in their movements. The arena, once filled with the hum of combat, had fallen into a quiet stillness, as if time itself had paused to watch what was unfolding. The crowd, once so eager to see a victor, had grown eerily silent. They weren't sure what they were witnessing, but they could sense the shift. Elias stepped forward, slowly, cautiously, not as a soldier, but as someone testing the waters of a new reality. He reached for her spear, his hand hovering just above the smooth, glowing shaft, but he didn't grab it. Instead, he paused, waiting. Elias Ward, his voice quieter than before, you don't need to do this, you know. You've already won. You could have taken me out at any time. Valyra's chest tightened, but she didn't respond immediately. There was something in his tone, something that disarmed her more effectively than any strike ever could. She had always been in control, always the one who dictated the outcome. But Elias? He was forcing her to confront something she had never considered, the idea that she didn't need to win this duel in the way she thought she did. Princess Valyra, almost to herself, more thoughtful than before, what do you want from this, Elias Ward? Elias Ward, smiling, his eyes full of a quiet understanding, I don't know. Maybe, understanding? Maybe just to prove that I'm here, that I'm worthy of being in the same space as you. His words hung in the air. Valyra, though still the princess, felt something shift deep inside her. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him to see her not as a princess, not as a fighter, but as something more. Princess Valyra, her voice faltering slightly, her grip on her spear loosening, you want to be worthy of me? Elias Ward, grinning, despite the tension in his body, not worthy of you. Just worthy of the fight. You're more than just a princess, Valyra. You're real. I didn't expect that. In that moment, the duel stopped being about victory or defeat. It stopped being about honor and pride. The battle, which had begun as a performance for the crowd, had turned into something entirely different. It was a conversation silent but loud, fierce but gentle. The two of them, once enemies, now stood in the middle of the arena, unsure of what would come next, but knowing that something had shifted. Something had changed. The duel had become something entirely different now. The arena, once charged with the tension of battle, now felt oddly still. The crowd, whose applause had previously filled the air, was now silent, watching, waiting, unsure of how to interpret what they were witnessing. What had begun as a clash between two worlds, an age-old tradition of diplomacy and war, was now something more intimate. It was no longer a contest for victory. It was an exploration of something deeper, something unspoken. Princess Valyra stood with her spear lowered, her posture no longer rigid or confrontational. Elias, though still in his bulky human armor, had stopped evading with the chaotic frenzy he'd relied on earlier. He was calmer now, more measured, and his eyes no longer held the playful mockery they once had. There was an understanding between them, a silent acknowledgement of the moment that had shifted everything. Princess Valyra, quietly, as if testing the words, you could have ended it 1,000 times. Elias Ward, looking up at her, a small, sincere smile tugging at his lips, maybe. But then I wouldn't have learned anything. You wouldn't have learned anything either. Valyra's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't sure why his words had such an impact on her. There had been so many moments during the duel when she had been poised to strike, to end it all, to reassert her dominance. And yet, she had held back. For the first time in her life, she didn't want to win. Or perhaps she didn't want to win the way she had always been taught. Princess Valyra, her voice soft, contemplative, I've spent my entire life being taught to win, to dominate. My bloodline, my heritage, it's all about superiority. About control. But you just kept standing. Elias took a step closer to her, his movements slow, deliberate, like a man walking on fragile ground. His helmet was still on, but it no longer seemed like a barrier between them. It was just a piece of armor, one that held no meaning in the space they now shared. Elias Ward, grinning wryly, sometimes, it's not about winning, princess. Sometimes, it's about finding out what you can learn by just staying in the fight. You don't always need to dominate to survive. Sometimes, surviving is enough. Valyra blinked, surprised by the depth of his words. She had spent so much of her life training, preparing for battles, for wars, that she couldn't remember a time when she simply existed in the moment. She had always fought with a purpose, to win, to prove her strength, to reinforce the legacy of her people. But Elias, this strange, clumsy human, had shown her something else. For the first time, she felt her grip on her spear loosen, and the weight of her armor seemed less heavy. She wasn't sure what to do with the feeling that was bubbling inside her, but she knew one thing: it was different. And it was because of Elias. The air between them hung thick with unspoken understanding. Their gazes locked, and for a moment, the crowd, the arena, the world around them faded into the background. It was just the two of them now. Two beings from different worlds, connected by an inexplicable force, drawn together by a duel that had become much more than either had expected. Princess Valyra, with a flicker of something akin to a smile, though it was still hidden behind her visor, "You think you've won?" Elias Ward, with a slight, confident shrug, "I think we both did." There was a beat of silence before Valyra moved again. But this time, it wasn't with the precision of a warrior or the strike of a spear. She reached up and, in a surprising gesture, unclasped the side plate of her armor. The smooth silver panel slid free with a soft, metallic sound, falling to the ground like an offering. The gesture was deliberate. It was a sign of surrender, of trust, of an acceptance that she was no longer bound by the expectations of her royal upbringing. Princess Valyra, quietly, "One piece for one move." Elias Ward, glancing at her, confused, then understanding slowly dawning, "You're disarming yourself. Matching my disadvantage." Valyra didn't respond, but the way she looked at him this time, without the mask of the princess, without the weight of her armor, was enough. Elias didn't speak. Instead, he simply stood there, watching her, sensing the shift in the air. There was something between them now. Something beyond words, beyond their differences. Something real. The fight had slowed, no longer a contest of strength and skill, but a quiet exchange of meaning and understanding. Every movement was deliberate. Each step carefully measured, not in pursuit of victory, but of something else, a connection. Elias stepped forward, his hand extending toward her. Not as a soldier offering to strike, but as a human offering something else, something simple, yet profound. It was a gesture of peace. Elias Ward, reaching for her helmet, "You don't have to fight anymore?" Valyra paused, looking at his outstretched hand, then at the helmet in his grasp. It was the symbol of her royal identity, her power. And yet, in this moment, it felt like a barrier. With a slow, almost imperceptible motion, she allowed him to remove her helmet. As it came off, her silver hair cascaded down around her shoulders, and for the first time, she stood before him completely unmasked. Her violet eyes met his, and for the first time since the duel began, she spoke with genuine softness, her voice free from the weight of her title. "Princess Valyra," almost a whisper, "you've seen me now. Unmasked. Unprotected." Elias Ward, his voice gentle, sincere, "I see you. Not as a princess. Not as a fighter. Just, you." The crowd was still, almost as if holding their breath. What had been a grand spectacle had turned into something far more personal, something that could not be fully understood by the eyes of onlookers. In the heart of the arena, two beings from vastly different worlds stood together, no longer as adversaries, but as something else, something unexpected. The arena was quieter now, as if the universe itself had paused, waiting for what would come next. The ceremonial duel, which had started with such clear expectations, had shifted into something more profound, a journey neither Valyra nor Elias could have predicted. There was no longer a crowd urging them on, no longer the weight of tradition pressing down on them. What remained was just the two of them, standing in the heart of the arena, alone in their shared moment of transformation. Valyra stood before Elias, the remnants of her ceremonial armor scattered around her like discarded symbols of a past life. Her long silver hair, now free from its protective helmet, shimmered in the artificial starlight. Her violet eyes met Elias's, and for a brief moment, it was as though the entire galaxy had ceased to matter. Nothing in this vast universe could be more significant than the connection they shared in this moment. Elias, still catching his breath, stared at her, no longer the awkward human soldier who had stumbled into the arena. He had transformed as well. His baton, once a useless tool, now rested by his side, a reminder of how far they had both come since the beginning of this strange duel. Princess Valyra, softly, almost to herself, "You never did fight like I expected." Elias Ward, smiling gently, "I never fight the way anyone expects. Guess that's my thing." Valyra's lips twitched at the corners. There was something about him, something genuine and unpolished, that made her feel more human, in a way. She had spent so long being an image, a symbol of power and grace, that she had forgotten the simplicity of just being, of just living. For a long moment, they stood in silence, their gazes locked. Neither spoke, yet both knew that something had changed. The duel, which had been a battle for superiority, had become something else entirely, a moment of mutual understanding. Princess Valyra, quietly, more to herself than to Elias, "I've spent my life wearing armor, hiding behind walls of tradition and duty. I've always been told what to do, how to act, what to think. And yet, you've shown me that there's more to life than that." Elias didn't speak. He simply watched her, his expression thoughtful. His world was different from hers, and yet, in this moment, their worlds had collided in a way that neither of them could have predicted. There was something beautiful in the way their differences had brought them together, not as enemies, but as two beings who had finally understood each other. Elias Ward, gently, with sincerity, "I'm not a fighter, Valyra. I never was. But I've learned that sometimes, the real fight is just being who you are, without all the expectations. Without the armor." Valyra took a step forward, her movements slow and deliberate. She had fought for so long, for so many battles, to prove her strength, her power. But in this moment, she realized something essential. Strength wasn't always about domination or control. It was about vulnerability, about being seen as you truly were. With one swift motion, Valyra removed another piece of her armor, a smooth, gleaming chest plate that had always been a symbol of her royal status. It clattered softly to the ground, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she felt lighter. She was no longer the princess of House Saranthari. She was just Valyra. A person, no different from Elias. "Princess Valyra," her voice low, almost hesitant, "you didn't need to fight like a soldier, Elias. You didn't need to be anything other than who you are." Elias Ward, meeting her gaze, his voice steady but filled with an understanding that went beyond words, "And neither did you, Valyra." There was a brief moment of quiet, but this time, it wasn't filled with uncertainty or tension. It was filled with understanding. A calmness settled between them, a peaceful recognition that the duel had ended not in defeat, but in something else entirely. Valyra took another step closer to him, her armor now discarded entirely. She was no longer the princess who wore the weight of her bloodline with every movement. She was someone else, someone she had never been allowed to be. She raised her hands, not in aggression, but in an open gesture, an invitation. "Princess Valyra," softly, almost as if testing the words, "shall we call this the end of the duel, Elias?" Elias glanced down at his baton, the weapon he had carried throughout the fight, then slowly placed it on the ground. He stepped closer to Valyra, his movements careful, like he was treading in unknown territory. But for the first time, he wasn't afraid. Elias Ward, smiling, offering his hand, "Yeah, I think it's over. But this feels like something else." Valyra reached out and took his hand, the gesture simple, but the weight of it monumental. The crowd around them began to stir, unsure whether to applaud or simply sit in stunned silence. The duel, once a battle for power, had become something far more intimate. And it was only just beginning. The moment stretched on, and for the first time in her life, Valyra felt like she wasn't just playing a part. She was living. And standing before her, hand in hand with Elias, she realized that sometimes the most important battles were those fought not with weapons, but with the heart. The arena, once charged with the electric hum of combat, had fallen into an almost sacred silence. The echoes of their movements lingered in the air like whispers, fading into the distance. The crowd, who had come expecting to see an end either in victory or defeat, now watched, bewildered. They had witnessed a duel unlike any other, one where the lines between winner and loser had blurred, leaving only a strange, unspoken bond between the two combatants. Valyra and Elias stood together, hand in hand, in the center of the arena. Their bodies were no longer locked in combat, but their connection was undeniable. The weight of tradition, the expectations of their worlds, had been left behind, discarded like the armor at their feet. What remained was something raw, something real. Princess Valyra, looking around the arena, her voice quieter than before, this is not what I expected. Elias Ward, smiling, a light-hearted grin spreading across his face, I don't think any of us expected this. But maybe that's the point. For the first time since the duel began, Valyra allowed herself to truly feel, to take in the reality of the moment. There had been so much pressure on her to be perfect, to be the symbol of strength for her people. But standing here with Elias, she realized that perfection was an illusion. True strength lay in embracing imperfection, in being willing to change and grow. She glanced at Elias, his rugged, unpolished form standing beside her. He wasn't a warrior in the traditional sense, he didn't have the grace or elegance of a trained fighter. But in that moment, he possessed something far more valuable, an open heart, a willingness to learn, and a quiet strength that came from simply being present. Princess Valyra, softly, almost to herself, I've spent my entire life wearing a mask, trying to be what everyone expects me to be. But in this moment, I feel free. I don't know what to do with it. Elias took a small step closer, his hand still holding hers, the warmth of his touch grounding her in the present. He looked at her with a mixture of respect and something else, something that had grown between them over the course of this strange duel. Elias Ward, his voice low, sincere, you don't have to be anything for anyone but yourself, Valyra. You don't have to wear that mask anymore. Not with me. His words struck a chord deep within her. She had spent so long living up to the expectations of her bloodline, her empire, that she had forgotten what it meant to simply be. She had been trained to fight, to dominate, to lead. But in Elias, she had found something else, something softer, yet infinitely more powerful. The sound of slow, hesitant applause began to trickle from the edges of the arena, like a distant wave breaking on a shore. It wasn't the thunderous applause of victory, nor the mockery of failure. It was something more subdued, more respectful, a recognition that something had shifted in the hearts of those watching. Even the high-ranking nobles, who had once looked upon the duel with disdain, seemed to acknowledge the profound change that had occurred. Princess Valyra, looking around at the quiet crowd, her voice tinged with a trace of amusement, it's strange, isn't it? I thought they were here to see a battle. Instead, they are watching something entirely different. Elias Ward, chuckling lightly, glancing at the nobles, well, I'm sure they'll get over it. You and I, though we've already won, haven't we? Valyra's smile was small, but it was genuine. The princess who had entered the arena with a sense of duty and pride had been replaced by something far more human. In that moment, she realized that she didn't need to win. She didn't need to prove herself to anyone. She just needed to live in the way that felt right to her. Princess Valyra, her voice soft, almost as if sharing a secret, yes, Elias. We've won. For the first time, Valyra stepped away from the center of the arena, no longer as the princess who had come to prove her strength, but as someone who had found something far more valuable, understanding. She glanced at Elias, her partner in this unexpected journey. Together, they had walked away from the battle not as adversaries, but as allies. Their worlds once so far apart had collided, and in that collision, they had found something unexpected, a shared path forward. As the two of them walked side by side toward the edge of the arena, the crowd began to stir, murmuring to one another. Some were still unsure of what they had witnessed, but one thing was clear, this duel would not be remembered for its violence or its drama, but for the connection it had sparked. The connection between two beings who had come from worlds so different, and yet, through understanding, had found common ground. Princess Valyra, with a playful smile as they left the arena, "I'm sure the nobles will have a few interesting things to say after this." Elias Ward, laughing softly, "Let them talk. We've already rewritten the rules." And as they walked out of the arena, the crowd parted for them, not in reverence of royalty, but in acknowledgement of something deeper. They had witnessed not just a duel, but a transformation. The princess had let go of her armor, and the soldier had let go of his fear. And in that moment, they had both stepped into a new world, a world of understanding, of mutual respect, and, perhaps, of something more. And so, a duel meant to uphold tradition became something no one expected. She entered the arena a princess armored in pride, in legacy, in purpose. He entered a human with no rhythm, no polish, but with a smile that disarmed more than weapons ever could. What began as a performance became a connection. Not forged in victory or defeat, but in laughter, awkwardness, and the quiet understanding between two unlikely souls. In the end, she removed her armor. Not just the silver plates, but the walls she had worn her whole life. And he left the arena with a helmet in his hands. And something far more powerful in his heart. Respect. And maybe, something even deeper. What would you have done in her place? Would you have let your guard down? If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Because here on Alien Chronicles, we don't just tell stories. We uncover what it means to be human even among the stars.